She appeared out of nowhere, a thin, trembling German shepherd with a coat matted in mud and eyes that spoke of desperation deeper than words. Her breath came in short gasps, her ribs showing beneath dull fur. But more than fear, there was urgency. She grabbed at his pant leg with her teeth, gently but firmly, her entire body trembling as she tugged. David froze on the forest trail outside Asheville, North Carolina, his heart pounding. He had set out for a quiet hike, but now, standing in the shadows of towering oaks, he felt pulled into something far bigger. "Hey, girl," he whispered. Her amber eyes locked onto his, pleading, begging. She tugged once more, then turned, limping ahead, looking back every few steps. David followed. The winding path narrowed, branches scratching at his jacket, the forest growing dense and dark. The dog limped quickly, urgency in every step, but never straying too far ahead. The air grew colder, heavier. They reached a clearing. In the middle sat an old, rotting cabin, its roof half collapsed, windows shattered, door hanging off its hinges. The shepherd stopped, her sides heaving. She looked back at David with wide, tearful eyes, then pushed her nose against the doorframe. David's pulse thundered. He stepped forward, the wooden floorboards creaking dangerously beneath his boots. And then he heard it. A faint, weak whimper. He pushed the door open fully. Inside was silence, until the whimper came again. In the far corner, behind broken crates and tangled ropes, sat a rusted cage. Inside, 3 tiny German Shepherd puppies huddled together, their bodies shivering, fur dirty and thin. One pup lay still, too still. David's breath caught. The mother whimpered behind him, her nails scratching the floor as she pushed forward, desperate to reach them. He dropped to his knees, tears burning his eyes. "You brought me here," he whispered. He gently reached into the cage, lifting one trembling puppy after another, cradling them in his jacket. The mother pressed against him, licking each pup's face with frantic urgency. The last puppy, the still one, he lifted gently. A faint breath. So weak, but there. David stood, clutching them all to his chest. "We're getting you out of here," he said, voice breaking. The mother followed, never leaving his side, as they ran back toward hope. The run back through the forest felt endless. David's breath came in ragged gasps as he cradled the fragile bundle of life against his chest. The mother shepherd stayed at his heels, her body moving on sheer willpower, her gaze locked on the tiny pups in his arms. Branches tore at his jacket. His legs burned. But he didn't stop. At the edge of the trail, his truck waited like a beacon. He flung open the door, gently laying the 3 shivering puppies on the passenger seat, wrapping them in his flannel jacket. The mother jumped in after them without hesitation, pressing her body around her babies, warming them with what little strength she had left. David started the engine with shaking hands. The nearest veterinary clinic was 20 minutes away in Asheville, but tonight it felt like a lifetime. He glanced at the rearview mirror. The mother shepherd's eyes met his, full of fear, hope, and something deeper. Trust. The smallest pup let out a faint, broken whimper. David pressed harder on the gas. The clinic lights glowed in the darkness, and he screeched into the parking lot, barely putting the truck in park before jumping out. He flung open the door, gathering the trembling puppies in his arms, the mother leaping out and sticking to his side. The front doors burst open, and a tech ran forward. "We need help." David's voice cracked. The vet team swept them inside, laying the pups on a warm table. Heat lamps flickered on, and oxygen masks were placed over tiny muzzles. The mother whimpered, pacing, her eyes wide and frantic. David knelt beside her, resting a calming hand on her head. "You did so good, girl. You found help. You saved them." One puppy let out a stronger cry. Another lifted its head just slightly. But the smallest one, the still one, the vet's face was tense. "Flatlining," she whispered. David's heart stopped. The vet pressed on the tiny chest, breathing softly into the pup's nose. "Come on, little one," she murmured. The room went silent, a single weak gasp. The puppy shuddered. A cry, small, hoarse, but alive. The mother let out a low whine of relief, licking the pup's face over and over. David wiped tears from his face. He looked at the mother. "You saved them," he whispered again, and she laid her head gently on his knee, her eyes finally softening. She knew. The clinic room was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of equipment and tiny, fragile breaths. The 3 puppies, now wrapped in warm blankets, nestled against heated pads. Their tiny chests rose and fell unevenly but steadily. The smallest one, the pup who had teetered on the edge of life, let out a faint, rasping sigh and curled instinctively toward his siblings. The mother shepherd, exhausted but alert, sat by the table, her head low, eyes fixed on her babies. David sat beside her on the cold tile floor, resting a gentle hand on her back. "You brought me to them," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You didn't leave them behind." The vet, Dr. Lillian Moore, placed a calming hand on David's shoulder. "She must have traveled miles to find help," she said softly. "She wasn't just running, she was searching." David looked into the dog's eyes, pools of pain, fear, and bottomless love. "She's a mother," he whispered. Dr. Moore nodded. Over the next hours, the staff worked tirelessly. Fluid drips, oxygen tubes, careful feeds from tiny syringes. The mother never left the table, her eyes tracking every movement, licking each puppy gently whenever allowed. David stayed too, his heart anchored to this small, fragile family he had stumbled upon in the woods. In the quiet moments between procedures, he spoke to her softly. "You're incredible, you know that?" he murmured. "You didn't give up." The dog's ears twitched. She turned and pressed her muzzle softly to his hand. They sat in silence, both watching three tiny lives fight their hardest battle. At dawn, one of the puppies squeaked, a bright, sudden sound that startled everyone in the room. David laughed through tears. "That's your fighter," he whispered to the mother. She let out a soft breath, resting her head against his shoulder. It was in that moment David knew. He couldn't leave them behind. Not her. Not the babies. They weren't just survivors. They were family now. The first light of morning spilled through the clinic windows, warm and golden, touching the small bundle of puppies as they slept curled against each other. Their breathing was steadier now, small noses twitching, tiny paws occasionally stretching in their sleep. The mother shepherd, her body still thin and trembling, finally allowed herself to close her eyes. She rested her head in David's lap, her breath slow and heavy with exhaustion. David stroked her gently, whispering, "You did everything right." Dr. Moore sat beside them with a quiet smile. "She hasn't slept in days. She was running on instinct and love alone." David looked down at the sleeping pups. "What kind of world lets her end up alone, locked away like that?" Dr. Moore's voice softened. "The kind of world that needs more people like you." Hours passed, and the pups stirred. The strongest one opened cloudy blue eyes and let out a soft whimper. The mother lifted her head, licking the puppy gently, her tail giving the faintest wag. The smallest pup still struggled. His breaths came ragged, shallow. Dr. Moore frowned. "We'll need to tube feed him around the clock. He's not strong enough to latch." David didn't hesitate. "I'll help. I'll stay." The mother turned her head, her gaze steady and unwavering on him. He felt it in that moment. Trust. By nightfall, David had learned to feed the weakest pup from a tiny tube, holding him in the palm of his hand, feeling each faint heartbeat. The mother lay beside him, watching every move, her nose occasionally brushing his fingers. She never left his side. When exhaustion overwhelmed her, she would curl beside him and the pups, her body pressing against his leg. On the second night, the smallest pup stopped breathing for a terrifying moment. David felt the life slip from the fragile body in his hands. "No, no, little guy, stay with me." He rubbed the tiny chest with 2 fingers, just like Dr. Moore had shown him. A faint gasp, then another, and then a weak, desperate cry. David broke down, holding the tiny life against his heart. The mother whined softly, licking his hand as if to comfort him. He looked at her through tears. "You and me, girl, we're not giving up." And neither was that tiny fighter in his hands. By the 3rd morning, the clinic felt like a second home. David hadn't left. He barely slept, staying curled on the floor beside the mother shepherd and her fragile pups. The strongest 2 had begun to stir more often, squeaking softly, their tiny tails twitching in their sleep. But it was the smallest one who consumed all their hearts. Every breath he took felt like a victory. Every soft, shaky whimper sounded like defiance against the odds. The mother never left his side. She licked his tiny ears, nuzzled him softly, and watched over him with unwavering vigilance. David whispered encouragements each time he fed him through the tube, his hands trembling, heart pounding with fear that one slip could be the end. But the pup fought on. On the 4th night, something extraordinary happened. As David held the tiny body in his hands, preparing for another delicate feeding, the pup rooted forward, not toward the tube, but toward his palm. A tiny pink tongue licked David's skin. The mother shepherd let out a soft, almost relieved bark and licked her pup's head furiously. David laughed, tears falling freely. "He wants to live," he whispered. Dr. Moore walked in, her face lighting up as she saw the scene. "That's the moment," she said softly. "He's chosen to fight." By morning, all three pups were feeding without assistance. David stepped outside into the crisp air for the first time in days, the mother shepherd by his side. She pressed against him, and he wrapped an arm around her neck, burying his face into her fur. "You saved them," he whispered. She looked up at him, and in those deep amber eyes he saw it. Not just relief, not just gratitude, loyalty, love. He sat on the clinic steps with her, the sun rising over the hills of Asheville, and made a silent promise. He wasn't just going to help them survive. He was going to give them a home. That afternoon, David filled out the adoption paperwork. He sat in the clinic office, pen trembling in his hand, the weight of the decision pressing on his chest. But it wasn't fear, it was purpose. The mother shepherd sat at his feet, her head resting gently against his knee, her amber eyes watching him with quiet understanding. Dr. Moore smiled as she slid the forms toward him. "Are you sure?" David didn't hesitate. "I've never been more sure of anything." The mother shepherd let out a soft breath, her tail giving a slow, steady wag. He stroked her head gently. "You deserve safety. They deserve a future." Outside, the spring breeze rustled through the trees. In the recovery room, three tiny pups slept soundly, full bellies rising and falling in perfect rhythm. David spent the next few days preparing his home. He transformed his living room into a safe haven, soft blankets, warm beds, and toys scattered everywhere. He built a small, fenced-in play area in his backyard, imagining the day when those tiny paws would race across the grass. And when the day came to bring them home, the clinic felt both full of joy and heavy with emotion. The entire staff gathered to say goodbye. Dr. Moore knelt beside the mother shepherd. "You're a miracle, sweet girl. Take care of them." The shepherd licked her hand once, gently. David carefully lifted each puppy into a soft carrier, their eyes still foggy but full of curiosity. The mother leapt into the passenger seat of his truck without hesitation, turning to watch as he closed the door behind them. He started the engine, his heart pounding with hope and responsibility. As they pulled out of the parking lot, the mother shepherd placed her head on his arm, looking up at him. He smiled through tears. "You're not alone anymore." When they arrived home, he opened the door wide, carrying the pups inside. The mother followed, her steps slow and careful as she took in the new space. She sniffed every corner, checked every blanket, then circled her pups as they settled into their new bed. Only when she was satisfied did she finally lie down, resting her head on David's foot. And for the first time, both of them exhaled. They were home. The first night at home was quiet, but not without worry. David sat on the floor beside the mother shepherd, her head resting in his lap, her eyes fluttering closed for the first peaceful sleep in days. The three puppies nestled together in their bed, tiny breaths soft and steady, their little bodies finally warm and safe. But every now and then, the smallest pup whimpered in his sleep, tiny paws twitching as if still running from old nightmares. David reached out, gently stroking his soft fur. "You're safe now, little one," he whispered. The mother shepherd stirred, lifting her head to nuzzle her baby before resting against David's leg again. Morning light filled the room, and for the first time, the house felt alive. The strongest puppy was the first to explore. Clumsy steps across the floor, curious sniffs at the toys David had carefully placed around the room. The second followed soon after, tumbling over a soft blanket and letting out a tiny bark that made David laugh out loud. But the smallest pup stayed close to his mother, hesitant, peeking out from behind her fur. David sat down beside them, holding out his hand. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said softly. The little pup looked up at his mother, then at David, and took one tiny, wobbling step forward, then another. Finally, he reached David's palm and placed his tiny paw on his fingers. David felt his heart shatter and rebuild all at once. "You're so brave," he whispered. Days passed, and the house filled with the sounds of playful yips, tiny barks, and the soft patting of little paws. The mother shepherd began to relax. She lay on the porch in the warm sun, watching her babies explore, always alert but no longer tense with fear. She would glance at David often, her eyes filled with gratitude deeper than words. At night, they all curled together on the living room rug. One man, one mother dog, and three tiny lives that had been given a second chance. David looked down at the mother shepherd, her head resting on his knee, and whispered, "I think you saved me too." And in the quiet of that moment, he knew it was true. Weeks passed, and the once fragile pups transformed before David's eyes. Their legs grew stronger, their ears began to stand tall, and their personalities bloomed. The biggest pup, bold and curious, was always the first to leap into new adventures, chasing butterflies in the backyard and tumbling over his siblings with endless energy. The second pup, gentle and watchful, stayed close to his mother, often mirroring her movements, learning from her quiet strength. And the smallest, the fighter, he became David's shadow, always just a step behind, peeking out from under tables, climbing onto the couch with clumsy determination, and curling up beside him with a soft sigh that melted David's heart every time. The mother shepherd, whom David had started calling Grace, blossomed into her full beauty. Her coat shone under the North Carolina sun, her gait smooth and confident, her eyes clear and warm. She had carried the weight of fear and pain, but now she carried peace. One afternoon, David opened the back door, and all three pups rushed out onto the soft grass, yipping with delight. Grace followed them, walking slowly at first, then breaking into a light trot, her tail wagging as her babies played around her. David sat on the porch, watching them, overwhelmed by the simple magic of it all. This family, once trapped and forgotten in a rotting cabin, now thrived in open air, surrounded by love. The smallest pup tugged at David's shoelace, his bright eyes sparkling with mischief. David scooped him up, holding the warm little body close. "You're not so small anymore," he whispered. Grace came up beside him, resting her head on his shoulder, her eyes gentle and knowing. They sat there together, watching her pups tumble and roll in the grass, safe and happy. David exhaled slowly, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. It was more than rescue. It was redemption for all of them. The summer sun dipped low over the hills of Asheville, casting long golden shadows across the yard where three young shepherd pups tumbled and played without a care in the world. David sat on the porch steps, a glass of iced tea in his hand, watching with quiet wonder. Grace lay beside him, her head resting against his leg. Her coat gleamed in the soft light, her breathing calm and steady. She had become more than just a survivor. She was home. The largest pup darted after a falling leaf, pouncing with joyful clumsiness. The second pup sat patiently nearby, watching his siblings' antics with calm amusement, always the thinker. And then there was the smallest, no longer the fragile little fighter he once was. He bounded toward David, paws too big for his growing body, tail wagging furiously. He leapt into David's lap, licking his chin and whining softly as if to say, "I made it." David laughed, pulling him close. "I knew you would, little one." The back gate creaked open, and Dr. Moore stepped into the yard, her eyes lighting up at the sight before her. "They look incredible," she said softly. David nodded. "They're thriving." Dr. Moore knelt beside Grace, stroking her fur. "And you, Mama, you did more than anyone." Grace's tail thumped gently against the porch. The pups tumbled toward Dr. Moore, eager to greet their old friend. "They remember you," David smiled. Dr. Moore looked at David, her eyes misty. "You gave them a life they never would have had." David shook his head slowly. "She did. I just followed where she led." As the sun set, the little family gathered on the porch, the pups curling up in a warm pile at Grace's side. David sat with them, feeling the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. He thought about that moment on the forest trail, when Grace had found him, desperate and determined, refusing to give up on her babies. And he knew. She hadn't just saved them, she had saved him too. The next morning, the sun rose over the rolling hills of Asheville, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. David stood on the porch, a cup of coffee warming his hands as he watched Grace and her pups play in the dew-soaked grass. The strongest pup chased butterflies with clumsy leaps. The thoughtful one sat beneath the big oak tree, observing the world around him with curious eyes. And the smallest, his fighter, sprinted straight toward David, ears flopping, paws thumping wildly against the earth. He leapt into David's arms, wriggling with excitement. Grace trotted up beside them, pressing her head against David's leg, her eyes soft and filled with peace. In that moment, surrounded by new life and unconditional love, David finally understood. This wasn't just a rescue story, it was a lesson in loyalty, in resilience, in love so pure it refuses to give up, no matter how dark the road becomes. David knelt down, holding the smallest pup close, and looked into Grace's eyes. "You showed me what real strength is," he whispered. She wagged her tail slowly, as if she understood every word. Later that evening, as the family curled up together by the fireplace, three sleepy pups piled on soft blankets, Grace resting beside them with her head on David's knee, he looked into the camera of his phone and recorded a message. "To everyone watching, these dogs taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes we think they need us to save them, but maybe they save us." He paused, stroking Grace's head gently. "They remind us what it means to love without fear, to fight without giving up, and to trust even after being hurt." He looked down at the pups, breathing softly, safe at last. If their story touched your heart, help us comment, subscribe. Be part of something bigger. Be part of Brave Paws. He smiled softly. Join our family, be their voice, be their hope.